Hashtag Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 8, Web Advertising Technologies and the Gray Hat Gold Rush. Entering the dot-com trenches. After parting ways with CSG, I landed a role as Senior Programmer Analyst at Web Advertising Technologies in Tampa. The company was riding the wave of late 90s dot-com opportunity, full of ambition, clever hacks, and a little too much confidence in gray hat SEO tactics. I was tasked with architecting and maintaining the web advertising traffic system, WATS, a platform that generated 3,500-plus unique clicks a day from over 3,000 unique IPs. Built on Windows 2000 COM Plus services, SQL Server 7.0, and ASP, it was ahead of its time in scale and function. My daily toolkit included Visual Basic 6.0, ADO, ADSI, Crystal Reports 6.0, Visio, Project, and Windows 2000 Server. I touched Oracle 8, Red Hat Linux, Samba, PostgreSQL, MySQL, and Apache. If it ran on a server, I probably had a config file open on it. Servers of Middle-earth. Most days I worked remotely, having just moved into a new house. But when I did go in, it was to Mike Hunter's house, specifically his converted two-car garage, now a fully climate-controlled server farm. We had a dozen or so Windows 2000 servers mounted on heavy-duty shelving, each named after a Lord of the Rings character: Elrond, Samwise, Bilbo, Arwen, Galadriel, Smaug. This was nerd paradise. Those servers ran our bread and butter, a keyword-jacking, script-based virtual site generator that gamed search engines like Yahoo, AltaVista, and even Ask Jeeves. We used randomized JavaScript generators that spit out grammatically correct gibberish, tuned with web position gold to dominate keywords and auto-generate high-ranking landing pages. When crawled, these pages spawn clones of themselves using COM plus shared memory processes, creating exponential keyword coverage. We ended up with nearly 1 billion indexed pages before the hammer came down. The crash. The model worked, for a while. At peak, we were pulling in several $100s per day in legitimate click-through revenue with clients like a major air filter vendor. We bought dozens of keyword-rich domain names, things like aircleaners.com and sunbeamairfilters.net, and spun up armies of landing pages. Then, one morning, every search engine de-indexed us at the same time. WebAdTech's cache machine was turned off overnight. I was let go, but I saw the writing on the wall. The entire SEO world changed in an instant, and all the little loopholes were suddenly closed. We flew too close to the sun and got scorched. Reporting for duty. Alongside the chaos, I collaborated remotely with Bob Surdock on a more conventional product, Model Imperial's reporting tool. We developed a suite of Seagate Crystal reports with dynamic selector controls rendered in ASP, our own early front-end control library. It was elegant and functional, and honestly, a nice balance to the madness of the ad generator. Quake breaks and side hustles. Every afternoon, we'd call a Quake break. A handful of us would jump into Quake 3 arena death matches for a 45 minutes or so. It was cathartic, nerdy, and, for that moment in tech history, absolutely normal. Mike, the founder, was a great guy and a serial entrepreneur. He ran several side hustles out of the same garage, including mywetpanties.com, myexwife.com, before revenge porn was a term, this site existed, and Gabriel.net, a massive adult content site that was pulling in $50,000 per month until one of the models sued her ex for custody of the photos. All this was par for the course in that pre-bubble burst era. Wild, weird, and totally unsustainable.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 9, HARTLine and the USPS, Contract Work That Stuck. HARTLine, Progressive Points and Regressive Politics. In early 1998, I was contracted through Robert Half Consulting to work with the Hillsborough Area Regional Transit Authority, HARTLine, in Tampa. My job was to design and implement a Microsoft Access-based system to manage their progressive disciplinary point tracking system, a framework used to determine employee terminations through automated point accumulation and lookbacks across a span of disciplinary actions. The system calculated rolling totals over 12 or 18-month spans based on specific infractions and lookup tables. Although the point accumulation logic remained active under the hood, visible totals were eventually disabled due to internal politics. At the start, I was told, "This system will be used to fire people. You okay with that?" Having worked for Pen Power, I already had a stomach for the less than glamorous parts of workforce optimization. I accepted. My software worked flawlessly, and I enjoyed strong rapport with the existing IT admin team. I had been the third candidate for the role. The first two had literally quit out of confusion or incompetence. That made my success even sweeter. Later that year, I briefly returned for a short-term follow-up engagement to train HARTLine's new hire on the system. All seemed well. But several years later, I was brought back in under a new contract for a longer-term upgrade and refactor. This was under the reign of Mac Helms, a dyed-in-the-wool IBM-style old-schooler, and Tim Stortz, who helped create an entirely different atmosphere. My rapport from previous engagements didn't seem to matter anymore. I accepted a low hourly rate of $35 an hour, down from my original $95 an hour, in exchange for what I thought would be a clean 12-week engagement. It wasn't. At a lunch with senior execs, I made the error of disclosing I was an atheist. Not long after, I was let go, 2 months early. They claimed it was for personnel reasons, citing a handful of perceived slights. I had jokingly asked a lead mechanic wearing a Navy hat if he was a fellow knuckle-dragger, an affectionate term for Navy machinist's mate. I also asked a newly hired IT guy if he'd learned in college not to use special characters in access field names, /s, $ and % posts that don't port to SQL Server. They accused me of demeaning staff. They pulled me into an office where a towering, bloated staffer read me the HR Riot Act, invoking the golden rule, "Here we do unto others, pause," as they were unceremoniously terminating me early from a contract that wasn't even being honored in good faith. It was stark. It was also petty. Years later, I'd attempt to take legal action against HARTLine for continuing to use the software without paying the full amount on the purchase order. Though the copyright law was on my side, the legal costs were not. USPS, year 2000 compliant and 100% platonic. During the same season, I also worked another Robert Half contract at the United States Postal Service in Tampa, reporting to Linda Almengual. She was charismatic, successful, and had a love of E-Class Mercedes and high-end jewelry. The marriage she was in at the time would eventually crumble. When their controls business went under, she cast in all her PTO and ended up working part-time at Home Depot just to keep driving the Benz. Life's funny like that. Still, she was an excellent manager, a fair client, and one of the better humans I worked under. The link to CSG, Florida. These two gigs, USPS and HARTLine, occurred back-to-back during a pivotal stretch of time. Just after these assignments, and following my attendance at the Atheist Alliance International Conference in Tampa, where I got a photo with James Randi in front of the infamous Mary Stain in Clearwater, coincidentally 1 mile from where I now live, I was brought into CSG, Florida. They needed my MCSE credentials to qualify for Microsoft partner status, and the rest is history. No more HARTLine, no more mainframe relics, just a new chapter in infrastructure, systems integration, and eventually, code.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 10, Hydrogen Media. The Pit. Hydrogen Media's office looked like the kind of place a 1990s hacker movie would dream up.
The entire first floor, dubbed the pit, was wide open, echoey, and raw. They had removed all the acoustic tiles from the ceiling, leaving the rafters exposed and painted flat black, giving the place a half-industrial, half-nightclub vibe. Each desk was outfitted with one of those sleek halogen lamps, low-slung, moody lighting that made you feel like you were working inside a showroom or an art installation. I shared the floor with Mike Salzman, a sharp guy with a dry sense of humor, and another teammate from Sri Lanka brought on under an H-1B visa. I wish I remembered his name now. He was one of the hardest working people I'd ever met. We were the quiet, capable core that held together a team too wild for its own good. Upstairs, though, it was a different world. That's where the sales guys operated. Guys with deep tans, wide grins, and way too much product in their hair. The parking lot was full of NSXs and leased Porsches. These were people who had never heard the word bubble or thought that .com money could actually run out. Everyone was partying like it was permanent. Unreal offices, unreal culture. One of the graphic designers went so far as to build a full Unreal Tournament map of the office. It wasn't just a fun one-off, it was actually really well done. He mapped out every hallway, every cubicle, every corner. You could spawn behind the conference room, grab a rocket launcher near accounting, and snipe through the server room if you had the angle. It sounds absurd now, but that map is how I learned the layout of the building faster than any floor plan could have taught me. It was also one of the few things that made Hydrogen feel like a team. Once or twice a week, people would load up the game after hours, and the company turned into a LAN party. Total chaos. But it was the kind of chaos you remember fondly. Reality strikes, but not too hard. Of course, HMI was too hot not to burn out. The business collapsed like so many startups of that era. Too many costs, too little cash flow, and too much ego. I was laid off in the final round, but by then they were actually offering severance. I walked away with 2 weeks' pay and zero bitterness. It had been a hell of a ride. There were hilarious conversations on fuckedcompany.com for years where insiders posted all of the various salespersons' commissions, and it was frustrating for sure. As usual, they were doing blah all day long and really not much of anything and making like most of any deal and the work done by the real technologists at a fraction of the markup. What's funny is that I landed on my feet almost immediately. Within a week, I had a new job. More money, more stability. It was one of those rare moments where the chaos pays out, like walking away from a roulette table after a big win and realizing you've still got your wallet. The work we did. Despite all the distractions, the technical side of things was rock solid. I built e-commerce systems that integrated real-time payment gateways through VB.com Plus components, linked them up with authorized.net, and connected to logistics systems using XML for live inventory and shipping rate calculations. We were building actual, working software that powered real businesses, sometimes despite the people upstairs. I even developed a standalone synchronization tool in VB6 that kept various recruiting databases in lockstep with Hydrogen's Cold Fusion sites. That app ran cleaner and faster than anything else they had, and was one of the few things to survive the eventual collapse. And most importantly, this is where I met Chris Williams. We would go on to collaborate on several side projects over the years. He became a real friend, the kind that sticks, not just a coworker you once knew.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 11, Ceridian, 1,000,000 Checks an Hour, the project that never stood a chance. I joined Ceridian Employer Services in January 2001 for what was supposed to be a short-term contract with a big goal. Build a gross-to-net paycheck calculation engine capable of processing 1,000,000 paychecks per hour. On paper, it sounded like an exciting technical challenge. In practice, it became a case study in how poor leadership can tank even the best-laid plans.
The company had brought in Extreme Logic out of Atlanta to provide their high-volume COM+ message queuing engine, a distributed processing framework to scale the system across an N-tier architecture. This was a big deal at the time. Pre-Azure, pre-AWS Lambda, so this was effectively early serverless in spirit, if not in name. The architecture was solid. All we needed to do was implement the endpoints and write the components to handle the queuing logic. In theory, it should have been plug and play. In reality, not quite. Too many chiefs, not enough logic. There were 2 contractors from Extreme Logic, 2 in-house developers besides me, 2 business analysts, and a Ceridian project manager trying to herd the cats. But none of it mattered, because the boss, the guy in charge, was a total bleephead. This guy rolled in every day in a Chrysler 300M like it was a chariot of the gods. Divorcing, bitter, arrogant, and clueless. Instead of building on what the prior team had started, they'd already developed a version 1 system, he scrapped it completely and decided to start over from scratch. His big idea? Let's just write stored procedures for everything to better understand the data. Only problem? The data was a mess. There were hundreds of tables, and most of them were half obscured by business logic layered over years of legacy design decisions. You couldn't understand the data by staring at it in isolation. But try telling that to someone who thinks buzzwords are a substitute for domain expertise. One ticket, hold the sanity. One moment that still grinds my gears happened midway through the project. I had borrowed a couple of Ceridian SQL Server and MSDN CDs so I could install them at home and mirror the environment. Completely standard practice for devs back then. I forgot to bring them back one day. This guy makes me leave work in the middle of the day and drive all the way home to get them, and I get nailed for speeding on Dale Marbury Highway coming over the hump. That moment right there, peak tech job humiliation. Being forced to drop what you're doing, rush home because of someone else's lack of trust, and getting a speeding ticket on top of it. Just one of those slapstick reality checks that tech life loves to hand out from time to time. Lessons learned and dodged. We never shipped a 1,000,000 check engine. The team never really gelled. The boss never got any better. But I walked away with some sharper COM+ chops, a little more SQL Server mileage, and a few battle scars that would serve me well later. Looking back, Ceridian wasn't a failure. It was a cautionary tale. The tech was there. The people mostly had the skills. But a project lives or dies by how it's led, and in this case, it died before it ever had a chance to run.
Hashtag Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography. Book 2, Chapter 12. Chase Home Finance and the Flow of Things. A $45 an hour paid vacation at first. I started at Chase Home Finance in March 2001 as a senior programmer analyst on the Zippy team, an enterprise group focused on developing and maintaining a massive N-tiered mortgage underwriting platform. The first week, I didn't even have system access. My boss, who'd hired me, was MIA, constantly out on interviews, probably hunting for his next gig. So I got paid $45 an hour to sit in a cubicle and flip through some old, outdated system manuals. Once I finally got into the system and PVCS version control, the real work started and quickly snowballed. Enter the Flow Response Generator. One of the tools I was assigned to maintain and improve was called the Flow Response Generator. I fell in love with it. It had an elegantly object-oriented structure that left a lasting impact on my coding approach. The core idea was genius. Files were parsed line by line, and each line was stored as a line object, which itself contained a collection of segment objects. These were structured for easy transformation and output, ideal for credit file processing. But when I got it, it was inefficient as hell. It took over 75 seconds to run because it wasn't caching its segment collections. By the time I was done with it, I had it processing under 300 milliseconds. That kind of performance gain doesn't just make systems better, it makes developers proud. A beautiful, fragile architecture.
The broader architecture at Chase was a beautiful Rube Goldberg machine. Data flowed in from 6 different loan origination systems, passed through a directory scanner, then branched to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac connectors, returned with results, and got fed into a credit bureau interface. It was a finely tuned orchestration of high-stakes data movement, with a ticking time bomb embedded inside. The person I had temporarily replaced, out on pregnancy leave, had commented out about 30 lines of mission-critical logic from the credit check subsystem. Specifically, she disabled the part that ensured a credit pull wasn't redundantly reissued for the same applicant. When I found it, it was too late. The system had been hammering credit agencies with unnecessary duplicate pulls. The team racked up over $250,000 in fees. A disaster. Their response? Cut someone. Guess who? Yep, the only guy who actually had code in production. Style over substance. Around that time, another team at Chase decided that instead of enhancing the flow response generator, they just rebuild the entire thing using a new buzzword stack, COM+, and all the hot middleware jargon of the day. Sound familiar? It was basically the same story as Web Ad Tech's virtual site generator. Take something that works, rewrap it in fluff, then pat yourself on the back without ever producing a usable product. None of those guys ever got code in production. I did. But they all stayed. Every last one. Former baseball players, networkers, code theorists, not a single working component between them. Watching the world burn. It was also a Chase where I watched the second tower fall. I'll never forget it. I was on the second floor of One Memorial Center in the break room, which overlooked the atrium. There, along with a few coworkers, I watched history unfold live. The room was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and CNN's coverage echoing from the small wall-mounted TV. It was a surreal, terrifying moment. And somehow all that chaos felt like a metaphor for corporate tech at the time. Beautiful structure, huge ambition, but fragile in ways you'd never expect. Mike Melberg. I was hired on the same day as Mike Melberg, a guy I immediately respected. He had an electrical engineering degree from either Columbia or University of Chicago, always showed up sharp in pressed khakis, and drove a clean, understated Lexus. One of the good ones, like the 300 series. Mike and I hit it off instantly. We had lunch together almost every day for the first month. He told me about taking care of his ex-wife and their son, how he'd made sure they had counseling, support, everything they needed. He was a class act and a brilliant mind. A couple years later, I heard the news. He'd returned from a long contract out west, found his girlfriend in bed with another man, and snapped. He shot and killed them both. Then he hit the road. Somewhere along a remote highway in Missouri, he was killed in a confrontation with police. Death by cop. Even now, I think of Mike often. If you're reading this, brother, wherever you are, I still think highly of you. You were a friend, and I'm sorry the world let you down the way it did.
Kenneth Courtney's autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 13. Radar Group and ACIA Software. Tampa Projects and Recycled Code. In early 2002, I was working under my own banner, ACIA Software, and doing contract work with a group called Radar, run by Bill Stopper and Barbara Farrell. On paper, it was a good match. I had the talent and tools, and they had some client connections. Unfortunately, that synergy didn't last long. I brought to the table my ASP shopping cart code, originally developed during my stint at Hydrogen Media, and Bill used it for a client of his without so much as a nod or a dime sent my way. It was frustrating, especially considering I'd also referred him to potential clients like Wellington Schools. Wellington ended up hosting with me for 5 years. When Bill found out they were under my wing and not Radar's, he completely disowned me, literally stopped talking to me. Years later, when I was working at Bisk Education, I saw him at the subway near the office, tried to say hello. He ignored me like I didn't exist. Some people never grow up. Social whiplash and tuxedo galas. Bill and Barbara had an interesting dynamic.
Toward the end of our working relationship, Bill and Barbara brought me along to this wild event that was somehow connected to FARC.com. It was one of those odd hotel party scenes where, as I later heard, he ended up hooking up with Barbara's friend with her blessing. Classic Bill. Barbara, on the other hand, was sharp as hell socially. She called me one time on super short notice to accompany her to this high-end gala. Black tie, high society. I didn't even own a tux, so I showed up in a bright yellow button-down polo and stuck out like a sore thumb. We were at the back table, but she clearly belonged in that world. Her friend that night was Courtney Frank, daughter of the longtime elected clerk of court in Hillsborough County, Pat Frank. Barbara and I stayed in touch on and off, and I heard years later that she and Bill had divorced. He said she never really matured. No surprise there. Barbara, though, she went on to become a successful real estate agent and seems to be doing great. Loose ends and reconnection. This period was a whirlwind of freelance energy. I still had my hands in code and was doing meaningful client work, but I was also realizing who was really on my team. A lot of lessons were learned about contracts, credit, and character. And even though it came with its share of drama and backstabbing, it was part of what shaped my solo career path.
Kenneth Courtney's autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 14, CareMedic Systems and Meta-Driven Elegance. A new start at CareMedic Systems. In June 2002, I landed a senior programmer analyst role at CareMedic Systems, Inc. in St. Petersburg, Florida. It was a turning point. The work was deeply technical, and the team, though small, was potent. None more so than Jeremy Pastica, with whom I collaborated synergistically to build something far greater than either of us could have built alone. Technical foundation. The goal was to replace a bunch of disparate internal apps with one unified, elegant system that could scale across 300-plus clients. We adhered to Microsoft Solutions framework principles throughout the lifecycle: design, development, deployment. At its heart was an N-tiered Visual Basic 6.0 client-server architecture, built with ADO for advanced data handling, Com Plus for business layer services, Visual SourceSafe for source control, and SQL Server 2000 for the data backend. But what made it elegant was the meta-driven design. We implemented a metadata architecture to define field-level security, validation rules, and data binding, all abstracted into a reusable data object. The ASP admin panel. Jeremy built a slick ASP-based admin panel that gave administrators precise control over field-level access, who could view or edit what, and under what conditions. This wasn't just form-level or role-level access. This was field-level access control, all driven by metadata and easy to extend. His admin tooling and my client implementation were seamless. His logic set the permissions, my data objects enforced them. It was pure professional harmony. A meta-driven object layer. Using lessons from earlier tools like Flow Response Generator, I wrote an extensible object that mimicked the behavior of classic ADODB record sets. It could load its structure and rules from metadata, expose fields and collections in an object-oriented way, automatically manage default permissions and validations, and cleanly bind to list views with consistent audit logging. Every client form came with an elegant list view for record navigation. Every field change was logged. It was truly ahead of its time. A fork in the road. Arctic Print Shop. The architecture we built here was so flexible, I later repurposed it for a commercial product, Arctic Print Shop, a shrink-wrapped set of speech therapy articulation cards. It was distributed via CD-ROM at trade shows and used a Microsoft Access backend. Sadly, like many ventures in my life, that one ended with betrayal. The speech therapist who pitched the product ultimately walked away with the revenue. Maybe I'll tell that story in full someday.
But I've forgiven her. Moving forward always trumps holding on.
Kenneth Courtney's autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 15, Open Door Software and Advantage International, My Career Lifeline. After Caramedic wrapped up and Radar Group fizzled, I found a consistent, low-drama home base in Advantage International, also known then as Open Door Software. I had met Trace Tervo years earlier, back when I was still with PenPower. He was instantly likable, calm, competent, generous with time and ideas. We clicked. Working with him felt more like teaming up with an old friend than grinding out code for a paycheck. Advantage quickly became my fallback shop, what I used to call my employer of last resort, but in the best way. Whenever the market dipped or I needed to get back on my feet, I'd check in with Trace, and more often than not, he'd have something worthwhile going on. My first .NET dive. It was with Advantage that I dove into .NET for real. I helped build one of my first C-code-generated applications, a custom sales management tool. I remember the project. We billed maybe $5,000, and I spent about 6 weeks on it full-time, working out of their Bush Boulevard office. The client eventually bailed or the project fell apart, I can't recall which, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I now had real-world .NET chops. That job lit a fire. The Microsoft stack, ASP.NET, SQL Server, ADO.NET finally made sense, and more importantly, I had control. I designed the database, architected the middleware, built the forms, tied it all together. It wasn't textbook learning, it was trial by fire, and I loved it. Real clients, real impact. One of the biggest projects we tackled was for PrepackRx.com, where I built a unit dose labeling system. It pulled in regularly updated FDA NDC data and served hospitals like Moffitt Cancer Center, Shriners, and University Community Health Center. It was clean, practical code, mission-critical and field-proven. Easily one of my proudest builds at the time. We also kept the Wellington School site going strong. That one stuck with me. I'd hosted them independently for 5 years and maintained the site through multiple rebuilds, including a full ASP.NET rewrite. It was one of those long-term, quietly rewarding relationships. Another interesting gig was The Insider's Guide, a tourism-based content platform that needed robust publishing tools and live editorial workflows. It was one of the more creative tech challenges I tackled that year. I also pitched in on DNN Learn, an open-source LMS project built on .NetNuke. It was modular and clean, and even though it didn't blow up commercially, it became a great way for me to sharpen my skills on reusable components and structured back-end logic. Still standing, still friends. Eventually, Advantage moved their office out to Odessa, and I lost track of them for a while. But just recently, around April 1st, 2025, Trace and I got back in touch. We had lunch, swapped stories, laughed about old projects and what could have been side hustles. Honestly, it was just good to see him. He's still Trace, level-headed, kind, sharp. It's rare in this business to find people you can work with over multiple decades who still feel like collaborators and not just contracts. That was Trace. That was Advantage. When the dust settled after every gig, I always knew they'd be there. And that counted for more than most jobs ever did. Kenneth Courtney's autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 16, Polk County Public Schools. Landing in Bartow. After a whirlwind of contracting gigs and short-term development sprints, Polk County Public Schools turned out to be one of the most stable and enjoyable stops of my career. I was brought on board through Rita Technology Services, specifically working with Michael Silcox, and from day one I knew it was different. The campus in Bartow, Florida was quiet, government-paced, and, aside from some of the bureaucracy, a surprisingly rewarding place to work. Most of my day-to-day was spent working hand-in-hand with Eric Schmidt, a conservative engineer and former flight control software guy who had deep chops. Despite his quirks, including being married to a significantly older woman, which baffled me at the time, he was rock solid. Our teamwork made for one of the most productive and respectful working relationships of my life. Project work and responsibilities.
I was tasked with development and maintenance on their massive N-tier OLTP student information system, which served over 100,000 students, 10,000 education personnel, and around 200 schools. Most of the legacy infrastructure was written in VB6, backed by SQL Server, and I authored dozens of reports using Data Dynamics Active Reports, along with interface forms and admin tools. My biggest contribution was as technical lead on a multi-million-dollar web-based student administration and registration system known as my.polk.fl.net, a DotNetNuke-driven enterprise portal. I worked with 3 full-time developers, a project manager, and various QA and DBA support. It was a robust effort with a significant technology footprint for a school system at that time. Key modules and integrations. Some of the custom modules I built for the DotNetNuke 2.1.2 system included Student Application, Single Sign-On SOAP Web Service, and TABE Test Administration and Registration. We connected these modules to the district's legacy systems and even pulled in data from the SAP accounting system using the SAP.NET connector and linked SQL servers, all early precursors to what would later become standard enterprise integrations. Hurricanes and hardship. I was there during the infamous 5-hurricane season of 2004-2005. It was disruptive, to say the least. We lost around 60 working days, sometimes over wind speeds of 35 miles per hour alone. It was especially painful knowing that most full-time employees were paid regardless of attendance. Contractors, like me, not so much. Still, I stuck it out. The work was meaningful, the systems were challenging, and the location kept me close to my family, which turned out to be important because August of 2005 was the month that my daughter Natalie was diagnosed with cancer. That began the darkest chapter of my personal life, the grueling cycles of hospital visits at St. Joseph's, sleepless nights, and the massive emotional and physical toll it took on me, including a 90-pound weight gain. Reflections. Despite the chaos, I look back on my time at Polk County with gratitude. The people, the projects, and even the old-school work ethic taught me a lot. I got to work with enterprise-scale systems in a relatively low-pressure environment, and I delivered solutions that were used by real people every day. I often say I wish I could have stayed there indefinitely. It was, for a while, a place of calm in the storm.
Kenneth Courtney's autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 17, Marriott, Modules, and Mistakes. The quietest gig I ever hated. My time at Marriott Vacation Club International in Lakeland, Florida was one of the strangest, most soul-sucking experiences of my career. I was brought in to do SOA integration work, connecting ASP.NET web services to a proprietary orchestration engine, transforming XML messages using XSLT, and occasionally touching Oracle and PLSQL backends. Sounds fancy, right? It wasn't. This place was the embodiment of Dilbert's headcount theory, hiring because budgets allowed, not because there was actual work to be done. In my entire stint there, I had maybe 8 hours of total assigned work. The rest of the time, I sat at my desk pretending to look busy in the cubicle gulag. My manager? A human cipher. Silent, expressionless, almost mythological. The kind of guy who might vanish into a puff of smoke if you asked him to lunch. You'd go days without seeing him. Then suddenly he'd assign a random task, like nothing happened. No meetings, no direction, just pause, tasks in the void. Ostensibly for something, but really nothing. On paper, I was brought in to build a service-oriented architecture integration connector. In reality, there was almost nothing to do. Just one connector that honestly took 4 hours total and could have been done in about 3 seconds by you, good buddy. That's not exaggeration. That's reality. The rest of the time, a black hole of busy silence. To justify my time there, I branded the Smart Client Notepad as a test harness for future connectors. But the truth is, it became something far more powerful, elegantly event-driven, plug-and-play, and genuinely useful. If you wanted to add support for a new document type, just add the file extension. The app would pick it up, load the right handlers, and fire all the appropriate events without a single line of new logic. Chef's kiss. That architecture was clean, scalable, and still ahead of its time by today's standards. Marriott didn't get it, but I did, and I took it with me. Code Project, Omar, and the real work. But here's the thing. While Marriott paid me to do nothing, I used the time wisely. I spent nearly every work hour building out my own side project, my version of Omar Al-Zabir's MVC Smart Client Notepad, which I'd found on Code Project. This thing was slick, pluggable, elegant, and architecturally sound. Omar was, and still is, one of the sharpest minds in .NET architecture. He went on to big things at Meta, but I still feel a soul brother connection with him, even if he has no idea I exist. That Notepad project? It became the foundation for the smart client reporting system I later built at Time Warner Retail Sales, and frankly, one of the most productive tools I've ever developed. Around the same time, I also adapted Omar's Page Flakes concept into a DNN module. It let you drag and drop little applets around your homepage, giving DNN a modern feel before anyone else was doing it. This was peak early 2000s innovation, Ajax without the bloat, and before anyone called it widgets. The side hustle incident. While at Marriott, I was still running my side hustle, selling my DMS and store modules for DNN. The ACIA store module, adapted from the iBuySpy app, had grown into a full-fledged e-commerce platform with PayPal support. One day, I found out someone was reselling it on snowcovered.com, and I got heated. I called Bryce Snow, owner of Snowcovered, to confront him about the piracy. From my cubicle. Big mistake. My silent boss, who never made a peep, apparently overheard the call. The next day, I got an email from Mike Silcox. Please quietly pack up your things and escort yourself out. No drama, no guards, just a polite self-termination. I walked out to my Chrysler Concorde, drove home, and by the next week, I was back in the saddle, this time with a new contract at Time Warner Retail Sales. Another project, another cycle. No regrets, just lessons. Marriott wasn't a great gig, but I don't regret it. It paid the bills, gave me time to build tools I'd actually use, and reminded me that real value comes from creation, not cubicle residency. The tools I built during that downtime had long tails, supporting clients and contracts for years afterwards. Sometimes the jobs you hate give you the clearest picture of what you really want to build.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 18, Smart Clients and Strong Code. Time Warner Retail Sales, The Right Kind of Work. When I landed at Time Warner Retail Sales in early 2006 through Rita Technology Services, thanks again to Mike Silcox and Felicia Hoffman-Crum, it felt like the tide had turned. After several gigs that had me idle, underutilized, or just clocking in for appearances, this one was the real deal. I was given full runway to design and develop a truly sophisticated smart client application, a Windows Forms MVC-style reporting tool built 100% from scratch in VB.NET. Think Omar Al-Zabir's Smart Client Notepad from Code Project, but supercharged and built to parse and report on multi-megabyte COBOL-generated ASCII printer files from the mainframe. This wasn't repurposed nonsense or bolted-on enterprise fluff. This was elegant, efficient XML schema-defined import logic that turned raw, unstructured text into SQL Server-ready, analytically rich data. Each import definition knew how to identify record groups, parse headers, interpret totals, and generate dynamic SQL, all driven by metadata. It was plug-and-play data parsing at scale.
The smart client side was modular and event-driven, built on the back of Omar's architectural patterns. Every document type had its own handler. Just drop in a new extension and the system did the rest. That same core would later power production tools in future contracts. Not just a seat filler. Officially, I was brought in as a contract programmer to cover for a woman on maternity leave. She wasn't terrible, just uninspired. The kind of staff developer who sees code as a checklist, not a craft. There was also a very sharp Indian developer on the team. She kept to herself, didn't talk much, but she was clearly competent. Our overlap was limited, my role was specialized, and I was mostly left to my own devices, which suited me just fine. This wasn't a Dilbert gig. They needed real work done, and I delivered. Context outside the code. Professionally, it was a great chapter. Personally, though, things were hard. Natalie was already deep into her battle with cancer, with constant trips to St. Joseph's Hospital. While the code was flowing, my life outside of work was breaking in slow motion. This was also during the time Anita was living out on Thonasassa Road in Plant City, working at a daycare where she met her interim boyfriend. She once told me he had one testicle, again, not my business, but the more pressing issue was his gambling habit, a problem I ended up indirectly funding. Between alimony, child support, daycare, and insurance, I was paying out around $3,000 a month. That situation was unsustainable, but the Time Warner project gave me enough mental and financial runway to hold it together.
Kenneth Courtney's autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 19, Bisk Education, Talisma and the Dashboard Dream. From Time Warner across the street to Bisk in Sable Park. It was around mid-2006 when I transitioned from my stint at Time Warner Retail Sales to Bisk Education. Funny enough, they were practically around the corner from each other in Sable Park. The connection came through Chris Telebashur, who got me in the door. Chris was one of those rare frat bro turned visionary types. He always had a way of floating up to high-paying leadership roles. He and I had worked together multiple times, and I always considered him a soul brother. Sadly, I later found out he died from a diabetic episode a few years after ghosting me on a side project. Wasn't ghosting after all. Internal systems, the real work. Bisk had two technical divisions, internal and external. I was part of internal tech, thank God. External was a disaster. Every time they brought on a new school client, they forked their internal CMS, total spaghetti code. No shared framework, no long-term vision. Internal, however, had its act together. I was hired as the lead architect for internal systems, specifically the line of business ERP app used by over 500 salespeople on site. It was a beast, but I loved it. I took point on enhancing the order entry system, building an ASP.NET staging app to queue, validate, and eventually process transactions before pushing them into Great Plains Dynamics via eConnect web services. It was clean, it was robust, and it worked. Returns, finally. One of the first things I noticed, there was no returns module, not even a manual workaround. So I wrote one, end-to-end. Integrated it into the existing workflow and solved a huge blind spot in their financial pipeline. Entered the dashboard. The big architectural lift during my time there was the Talisma ERP integration. The goal was ambitious. Unify 10 separate enterprise systems into a single departmental dashboard. One screen. Real-time, context-rich customer data. BizTalk Server 2006 R2 orchestrations were the backbone for the message workflows. I did all the technical architecture and led the implementation. FIT and real-time financial data. The Florida Institute of Technology partnership was another beast. We had to sync data, financial aid, payments, registration, demographics, in both real-time and batch modes.
I designed the web service endpoints and the transactional processing queues. Clean, scalable, and about as cutting-edge as you could get in 2006 without blowing the budget. Who we were. Bisk was managing programs for major universities: Notre Dame, Tulane, St. Leo, FIT, Thunderbird School of Global Management, and more. The building was alive with call center reps, tech teams, a full warehouse for physical textbook fulfillment, and training centers. I'll never forget working under Gary, last name, the CIO. Corporate through and through, but he ran a tight ship and gave me plenty of autonomy. In summary, Bisk was the first place where I wasn't just a dev, I was an architect. I made high-impact contributions that didn't just solve immediate problems, they transformed how the business operated. Even though the external tech stack was a mess, internally we built stuff that lasted. And I built relationships, Chris, Mike Silcox, others, that would echo through the years to come. Next up, I get fired from Marriott for calling a guy about module theft, but land at Time Warner, build one of the best reporting frameworks of my life, and try to hold everything together as Natalie gets diagnosed with cancer.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 20, Natalie K. Courtney. We're 20 chapters into Book 2, and only now am I ready to write about Natalie K. Courtney. She was conceived in love, right after Anita and I got back together in early 2003. May, maybe. Lauren was 4. The context: I had essentially told Anita I was going to sell the house, move into my brother's basement, and reconnect with a very sweet woman named Virginia Bing Perez, whom I'd met through the PI community. Yes, the Philippines. I'm abbreviating. Bing had traveled with her sister, an allopathic med student in the PI, who was doing her internship in Hawaii, then a residency in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, coincidentally 5 minutes from my brother's house. I had hit it off with her multiple times. Everything was falling into place. So when I told Anita I was heading north and moving on, she got the message. She stopped fooling around. I loved Lauren, and separation had caused tremendous financial strain. I couldn't keep sending over $2,500 a month in support, especially while she was living with a guy whose gambling addiction was becoming impossible to ignore. Despite claiming to live simply, she had chosen the largest and nicest apartment in Brandon at the time, filled with rooms-to-go furniture I had paid for. Then came the grand gesture. Anita returned, with a dozen roses, a dress, and no panties. She moved back in that weekend. No hard feelings, one testicle gambling habit guy. I genuinely hope you landed on your feet. And to be fair, life got good again. I was making decent money programming. We had a beautiful house. Anita kept the yard in full bloom. We added custom concrete curbing around the trees and driveway. It was bright, clean, warm. My photo albums are still filled with those images. Then came Natalie. Born December 12, 2004. A near clone of Lauren, but uniquely her own soul. Different, just like Mika and Daisy are different. I'm fairly certain she's here with me now, one of my guardian angels. I saw a man tell a story about an NDE where he saw his daughter who had died young, all grown up in the afterlife. That stuck with me. Natalie was greeted with the same joy Lauren was. Her life was a miracle. Diagnosis. At 11 months old, she developed a kidney infection. During follow-up imaging, doctors found a tumor. Initially diagnosed as Wilms tumor, it was later confirmed, after biopsy, as rhabdoid tumor of the kidney. Less than 5% survival rate. We were not in that 5%. From diagnosis to passing in June 2006, life was a blur. I'd finish my day at Polk County Public Schools, drive home, change, and head to St. Joseph's Children's Hospital in Tampa. I'd sit with Natalie, sometimes for 5 hours, 5 or 6 nights a week. My dad retired early and moved to Kings Avenue in Brandon,
then to a golf course home in Summerfield, across the street from the Villages, but in a gated community, unlike the Villages, as Linda would gladly remind you. They were a blessing, tremendously helpful. So much so that Natalie passed in Linda's arms. Both Linda and Bonnie, Anita's mom, were holding her when she left us. Around the same time, my UU pastor died of cancer, another spiritual blow. Then my father, also from cancer, the very day I was arrested. I was 320 pounds at Natalie's funeral. Enormous, hollow, crushed. Aftermath. After the funeral, Anita issued her ultimatum. She needed to go back to Ohio to be closer to friends and family. We had 2 cars at the time. One was the 2005 Dodge Neon SXT, and I can't recall if it was the 1999 Concorde or the 1994 Camaro Z28, which I bought from a neighbor down the cul-de-sac. But she didn't take either. Instead, she bought a last-minute plane ticket, flew north, rented an identical Dodge Neon to the not-yet-paid-off one in the driveway, and totaled it 2 weeks later in a solo accident. $500 deductible. Then she totaled another Neon in a car wash. Yes, a car wash. Another $500. Meanwhile, the original car was sitting in the driveway, still insured, still being paid for by me. 2 weeks into her visit, her mom called me. "Ken, have you heard from Anita?" "No, I assumed she was staying with you." "I haven't seen her. You better take her off your home equity line of credit." I did. A week after she returned, 5 weeks and $12,000 later, I was called into the garage by 2 police officers. Anita had written a check against the HELOC to pay her attorney. It bounced. She called the cops on me. No hard feelings, honey. Re-divorce. We re-divorced. Civil terms. 2-year rotation of shared custody with Lauren. Technically, when I had her, Anita should have paid me support. I still sent her $600 a month. Turned out, that money helped fund a crack habit with her new partner. Lauren, though, she made it through all of this a beautiful person. And when I see her, she tells me she's forgiven me. And that is everything.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 21, Touchdown Dreams and Code at Midnight, JetKey Software / Fantasy Football. In the fall of 2008, right as the economy was cracking and before my life would take one of its most dramatic turns, I found myself in the sweet spot of professional momentum. By day, I was leading technical projects at Bisk Education. By night and weekends, I was cranking out one of the most satisfying freelance projects of my life, a social network for NFL and fantasy football fans built on .NETNuke for a startup called JetKey Software. I was billing $55 an hour on 1099. My day job at Bisk paid around $45 an hour W-2, so for a few months I had finally figured out the balance between working a day job, freelancing at night, and still keeping my sanity, barely. JetKey Software's founder had a vision. He wanted to build a sports-centric community platform that fused fantasy league mechanics with the rising culture of social networking. Think early Twitter meets ESPN forums, all wrapped into one branded experience. We didn't call it Godar.com at the time, but looking back, it had all the makings. The code was elegant, the user model was layered, the incentives were in place, and I had full code control. Leading the code charge. I was the lead integrator, architect, and developer. The stack was ASP.NET with C#, using .NETNuke as the foundation, which at the time was still maturing. I leaned into every strength I had. Built a custom module that mirrored Twitter's functionality. Users could post status updates, share reactions during games, and follow other fans. I wrote that from scratch. Nothing like it existed in the DNN ecosystem at the time. Then came the referral system,
We created a multi-level viral invite engine where users could pull in their contact lists from Yahoo, Gmail, and AOL, still relevant back then, and send off slick branded invites. We tracked referral trees and user growth analytics like it was a startup headed for Series A. We didn't just want eyeballs, we wanted stickiness. The dashboard. Fantasy football meets WWF. One of the most technically ambitious pieces I built was the custom dashboard. I used Windows Workflow Foundation, WWF, and the ASP.NET Ajax Control Toolkit to build a drag-and-drop personalized experience. Users could assemble a stats dashboard tailored to their favorite players, teams, and matchups. Data came in from a sports stats feed we subscribed to, and I wrote the import tool to parse, clean, and load it on schedule. I coordinated with contractors to ensure the feed aligned with our data model and everything worked smoothly, on time, under budget, and with room to scale. Honestly, the level of integration and polish we pulled off in 2 months rivals some platforms I've seen take years. Midnight hustles, dream projects. Every night, I'd roll out of Bisk, maybe grab some food, maybe not, and boot up the development environment at home. I was living on adrenaline. This wasn't just a side gig, it was a real product with real potential. The traffic was coming, we were already seeing active beta users, and the roadmap was solid. We had big ideas: video integration, real-time score tracking, even mobile apps, which were still early stage in 2008. This could have been something, but then it wasn't. What could have been? We all know what happened next. My arrest in 2009 would change everything, and this project would become just another page in the What Could Have Been file. I don't bring this up with bitterness, just clarity. Godard.com never launched. JetKey software faded. But the code was beautiful, and I was proud of it. I still am. There are very few times in life when all the cylinders fire at once, when the vision is tight, the code flows, the business model makes sense, and you're in it. This was one of those times. For 2 months, I got to live as the architect of something truly exciting. I got to build. I got to lead. I got to dream. And that, even now, feels like a win.